I'm Sigourney Weaver and I'm 27 years old. 7 years ago, my mother stood in my childhood kitchen and told my father that I had made the whole thing up, my medical school acceptance, my residency interview, all of it, just to get attention. She said I was delusional, that I'd always been the type to invent a life rather than live one. That single lie, delivered with the precision of someone who knew exactly how to weaponize the truth, cost me my entire family. And I let it happen. I want to be clear from the start. I'm not here to make you feel sorry for me. I'm here because I finally understand what it means to stop explaining yourself to people who have already decided who you are. Before I get into this, I need you to know that if you've ever been in a position where the people who raised you chose a convenient lie over the evidence of your own life, this will probably land differently. So here goes. My childhood could be summarized in one image: me at 9 years old, standing backstage at my dance recital while my parents sat in the audience watching my older sister Carla perform. They weren't at my performance. They were never at my performances, but they never missed one of Carla's. This wasn't neglect exactly, it was more like strategic invisibility. My mother had this way of nodding along when I told her about my achievements, like she was filing them away in a mental folder marked Sigourney's hobbies. Meanwhile, Carla got Kodak moments. Carla got the phone calls to relatives. Carla got the story. I was the quiet one. I was the one who studied in her room instead of demanding attention. I was the one who learned early that if you needed something from your parents, you had to earn it through perfect behavior and perfect scores and perfect silence. Carla, on the other hand, had this easy magnetism. She could walk into a room and suddenly everyone understood why the room had been waiting for her. My mother loved that about her. My father loved it. Everyone did. I don't think I'm being unfair when I say that Carla noticed the shift when I was 16. It started small. I'd gotten a 15/20 on my SAT, perfect score. I remember telling them at dinner like I was just making conversation. My father looked up from his pasta. "That's good, Sig," he said, and then he turned back to Carla and asked about her college visits. I had worked for 6 months. I had taken 3 practice tests. I had tutored 2 junior students for free to reinforce the material, and it was good. But 2 weeks later, Carla didn't get into Yale early action, and our entire household tilted. My mother started talking about how unfair the admissions process was. My father spent hours on the phone with his friend Robert, who worked in development at another school. For Carla, they assembled an entire rescue operation. For me, they had a nice dinner where my mother was quiet, and my father asked if I wanted dessert. That's when I saw it in Carla's face for the first time, real, genuine fear. I was becoming visible and she couldn't tolerate it. She got into Yale eventually. Legacy advantage. When she left for college, I thought something in our house would shift. I was wrong. It just meant my invisibility went from painful to convenient. I became something to worry about in the abstract. Is Sigourney okay? Is she making friends? Is she eating enough? But they never asked me directly. They asked my school counselor. They asked my friends' mothers. They constructed an entire narrative about me without ever asking me what was true. When I was 17, I made a decision. I was going to become a doctor, not to prove anything to my parents exactly. I was past believing that anything I did would move them. I was doing it to prove something to myself, that I was capable of extraordinary things, that I could build a life that mattered, that I could become someone worth seeing. I got into Columbia. I called my mother to tell her. I remember exactly where I was, standing in the hallway of my school holding a physical acceptance letter, completely overwhelmed. I'd gotten into my first choice, waitlisted at 3 others, but Columbia had wanted me, early acceptance, full ride scholarship, everything. My mother was at work. I called her anyway. "Mom, I got in," I said. "Columbia, full ride, Mom." She cried. For the first time in my entire life, my mother cried because of something I had done. And in that moment, with her voice breaking on the phone, I felt something unlock inside me. She saw me. After 17 years, my mother finally saw me. It was the most sacred moment of my childhood. "I'm so proud of you," she said. "Your father is going to lose his mind." And he did. He called me that night. He told me 3 times how proud he was. He asked me detailed questions about the program, about my plans, about everything. For exactly 3 weeks I was the golden child. I was the focus. I was the one my parents bragged about to their friends. Then I made a catastrophic mistake. I told Carla. She came home for spring break in my senior year. I was excited to tell her, I think. I wanted to share it with my sister. I wanted her to be happy for me. I remember sitting on her bed, her perfectly organized bed in her perfectly curated room, and telling her all about it. The scholarship, the program, the fact that I'd gotten in early, the way Mom cried. She listened, she hugged me, she said all the right things, and I, pathologically trusting, believed that she meant them. What I didn't understand was that Carla had discovered something at Yale. The life I was about to build was going to overshadow hers in a way that mattered. A pre-med track at Columbia with a full scholarship isn't just impressive, it's the kind of thing that becomes the family story. It replaces the old story, and Carla had spent her entire life being the story. So she rewrote it. I remember the night my father called me into his office. I was in my room, working on my calculus homework. It was a Thursday. I remember because Thursday was always when my father relaxed on the couch with a drink, and if he was calling me into his office instead, something was wrong. "Sit down," he said. He wasn't angry yet. He was past anger. He was in that cold place where disappointment has calcified into something permanent. "What's wrong?" I asked. "Your mother and I had a conversation with Carla today," he said. "She's concerned about something you told her. She said you've been telling people you got into Columbia, that you have a scholarship, that you're going to be a doctor." My stomach dropped. "I did get in, I can show you the letter, I have." "Sigourney," his voice cut through mine like he was putting down a child. "We need to talk about why you're making up stories. We need to talk about what's actually going on in your head." I sat there for 40 minutes while my father explained to me that Carla had told my parents that I'd never actually applied to Columbia, that I'd forged the acceptance letter, that I'd been showing it to friends at school and lying about it, that the whole thing was a symptom of something deeper, something they needed to address with professional help. I showed him the letter. I offered to call the admissions office. I offered to show him the email confirmations. I offered to have the dean call him directly. I gave him the mailing address of the medical school. I offered everything. He listened to all of it with his face completely still. Then he said, "I think you should speak to a therapist about this fantasy you've created." The words hit me like a scalpel, clean, precise, devastating. "This is a lie," I said. "Carla is lying to you. I got in. I have the proof right in my—" "Your mother cried when she heard you say this," he said quietly. "She's devastated. She wants to help you, but you have to be honest with us. You have to want to get better." I left that conversation knowing two things. One, I was going to Columbia. Two, my family had already decided that I wasn't. What happened next was a series of desperate attempts to fix something I didn't know how to fix. I called my mother 17 times in the next week. She picked up once and told me that I was spiraling and that calling repeatedly would only prove Carla's point. I emailed her. Long emails with documentation, acceptance letter PDFs, screenshots of my student portal, the financial aid package. She replied to one, "Please stop, you're scaring me." I sent a physical letter to my father, certified mail. Inside it I included an acceptance letter, copies of my transcript, and a letter from my guidance counselor confirming that I had applied and been admitted. I asked him to call the school directly. "You can verify everything," I wrote. "Call the admissions office, call Dean Patterson. The number is on the letterhead. Please just ask." The letter came back, unopened, returned to sender in my mother's handwriting. I tried asking my father directly. He told me he wouldn't play along with this anymore. I tried asking my mother if we could go to family therapy. She said, "Therapy is for people who want to be helped. You clearly don't." I couldn't tell you exactly when I stopped trying. It wasn't a single moment. It was a slow fadding, 14 calls becoming 12, becoming 4, becoming 0. It was the realization that they had made a choice, and I couldn't choose differently for them. It was understanding, really understanding, that my entire childhood had been a preparation for this, being unseen. This was just the final, most brutal version of it. Here's what they never understood. I didn't need them to believe me. I had the evidence. I had the acceptance. I had been chosen by an institution that existed independently of their validation, so I went to Columbia anyway. I went to Columbia and I went alone. My first semester I became someone new, not reborn, that's too clean, more like someone who finally understood that survival required compartmentalization. I was a pre-med student by day and I was someone whose family didn't exist by night. I built a new family. My organic chemistry professor, Dr. Reeves, became the person I told things to. My roommate, Jasmine, became my sister. My study group became my blood. These people chose to show up for me. These people chose to see me. I called my parents exactly once during my first year. I wanted to tell them about my grades, A's, all of them, including organic chemistry, which had a 30% failure rate. My father answered, Sigourney. Hi, Dad, I said. I wanted to let you know. We've discussed this, he said. I don't think it's healthy for you to keep calling. I haven't called in 4 months. I just wanted to tell you. Please don't contact us again until you're ready to tell us the truth about what happened. He hung up. I stood in Jasmine's apartment, not even my own room, too vulnerable. I needed witnesses, and I cried for the first time since that night in my father's office. I cried because he had just made it official. I wasn't their daughter anymore. I was a story they didn't believe, and stories they don't believe don't exist. The cruelty of it, and I say this without hyperbole, was architectural. It was beautiful in its precision. Carla didn't need me to disappear completely. She just needed my parents to believe that I had abandoned them. If I was reaching out and they were rejecting me, then I was the one who'd failed. I was the difficult one. I was the one who had created this distance by refusing to tell the truth. The narrative protected them from having to confront what they'd actually done, which was choose a lie, because the lie made them feel better about themselves. I didn't contact them again. What I did instead was disappear into work. I became the kind of medical student who was barely a person outside of school. I studied until 2 a.m. I volunteered at clinics. I tutored. I built a resume that was so impressive I didn't have to wait for anyone's validation anymore. The work spoke for itself. I matched with a competitive residency program. I got interviews at hospitals in New York. I was 25 years old, and I had built a life entirely independent of my family's belief in me. It turns out that's actually possible. You don't need them to believe you're a doctor. The medical school does, the board does, the hospital does, and after a while you do. I was starting my residency at Mount Sinai when it happened. It was a Tuesday night. I was 8 hours into a 12-hour shift in the emergency department. I was tired in that specific way that only emergency medicine makes you. It's not sleep tired. It's the kind of tired where you've seen 5 traumas and you're running on adrenaline and muscle memory, and the bitter cold knowledge that someone somewhere in this hospital is going to die on your shift, and there's a possibility you can't prevent it. I was charting in the residence station, fighting to keep my eyes open when the attending came over. Weaver, you've got an incoming trauma, multicar on the FDR, you've got first priority on this one. I stood up, I started moving. This was the rhythm of my life, and I was good at it. I was good at compartmentalizing. I was good at seeing people not as individuals but as injuries that needed addressing. A 42-year-old female blunt force trauma, possible spinal involvement, that's what I knew. She came through on the stretcher and I did what I've been trained to do. I ran the protocol. I checked her pupils. I ordered an X-ray. I asked the EMT about the mechanism of injury. And then she looked at me. Even broken, even sedated, even with a brace around her neck and blood in her hair, even as a patient and not a person. She looked at me and I knew. It was my mother. I don't remember the next 30 seconds with any clarity. I remember my hands were still moving. I remember asking for the CT scan. I remember thinking I should step away, let another doctor take over, get myself out of this room. I also remember that I didn't. Instead, I did what I do, I fixed her. I found the fracture in her T12 vertebra. I consulted orthopedics. I managed her pain. I sat at her bedside until she was stable enough for ICU admission. And I did all of it as if she were any other patient, because if I didn't, I would shatter right there on the hospital floor. When she was stable, when the immediate danger had passed, I stepped out of the room. I walked to the bathroom in the basement of the hospital, and I sat on the floor in a locked stall for 9 minutes while my heart did things I didn't know a heart could do. My mother had been hit by a drunk driver on the FDR. She'd been alone in the car, which meant my father wasn't in the hospital yet. She'd been conscious enough to tell the EMTs to call him. She'd been alive enough that saving her wasn't theoretical. She would live because of me. I sat on that bathroom floor and thought about that with the kind of clarity that only comes from a severed emotional connection. I had just saved the life of a woman who believed I'd made up my entire future. I had just given her a second chance on this earth, and she still didn't know who I was. My father arrived at the hospital 47 minutes after my mother was admitted. I was updating her chart when I saw him come through the doors. He was older than I remembered, smaller. He moved toward the ICU like he was walking through water. I should have let another doctor brief him. I didn't. Mr. Weaver, I said, approaching him with the same professional detachment I would use with any family member of any patient. Your wife is stable. She sustained a compression fracture of the T12 vertebra, but there's no spinal cord involvement. We've got her on pain management. Orthopedics is consulting tomorrow morning. He looked at me. I watched it happen in real time, the moment before recognition and the moment of recognition itself. It moved through him like a physical thing. Sigourney, he said. Dr. Weaver, I said, and I've never been prouder of anything in my life than I was of keeping my voice level. The hospital gave me your wife as a patient. I'm her primary resident. I'll be overseeing her care tonight. I watched him try to construct a sentence. I watched him understand what that meant. I watched him see the ID badge clipped to my coat. I watched him see the white coat. I watched him see me. He started. She's going to be fine, I said, but she needs rest. You can see her, but keep it brief. I turned to walk away. He called after me. Sigourney, wait, we need to talk about. Right now you have a wife who's been in a major trauma, I said, still not turning around. Unless you want to discuss family history, I'd suggest you spend your time with her. He stood there. I could feel him standing there, but I didn't turn back. What happened next wasn't a confrontation exactly. It was something quieter and infinitely more powerful. Over the next 3 days, while my mother recovered and my father stayed in the waiting room like a man who'd been lobotomized, the truth about what had happened 7 years ago started to emerge. My mother's medication made her chatty. She mentioned to one of the nurses that her daughter had gotten a little confused about Colombia when she was in high school, that it had been a phase. The nurse, a woman named Margaret who knew me because I'd helped save her mother's life 3 months earlier, mentioned this to me. Then, because Margaret was the kind of person who believed in actual truth, she asked me directly if this was accurate. I told her the entire story. By the next morning, everyone in the hospital knew. My attending knew. The nurses in the ICU knew. The orthopedic surgeon who consulted on my mother's case knew. They all knew that I had saved my mother's life, and they all knew that she didn't believe I'd become a doctor in the first place. Carla came to the hospital on day 4. She was living in Boston now, doing something in finance. She hadn't seen me since I was 18. She looked at me like she was seeing a ghost, which I suppose she was, a ghost of the invisible girl she'd once convinced everyone was a liar. Sigourney, she said. She said my name like a question. Carla, I said. I was sitting in the ICU break room charting. I didn't stand up. I need to talk to you, she said. That's fine, you have until I need to check on my patient, our mother. She flinched. I know why I'm here. Mom and Dad told me. She sat down without being invited. I'm not going to apologize for what I did. I looked up from my chart. Okay. But I need you to understand why. When you got into Colombia, everything changed. My entire life had been structured around being the one they paid attention to, and suddenly it wasn't about me anymore. It was going to be about you, and I couldn't accept that. I watched her. I wanted to feel something. Anger, vindication, the satisfaction of watching her try to justify the unjustifiable. Instead, I felt nothing. She was just a person who'd made a choice 7 years ago, and I'd already made a life around that choice. I don't need your explanation, I said. I don't need your apology either. What I need is for you to understand something. I was 17 years old. I had finally done something that made my parents see me, and you decided that couldn't happen, for no reason other than your own comfort. That's not fair, she said. That's actually extremely fair, I said. You lied about me. They chose to believe you. I became a doctor anyway, and now I'm the person who has to decide whether I want you in my life or not, and right now I don't. She left the room. I never saw her again that visit. My mother recovered. She went to physical therapy. My father came to visit her every day and said nothing to me except good morning when he saw me in the hallway. The nurses started to understand that my family situation was complicated, and they stopped asking about it. 2 months after the accident, my mother was discharged. As she was leaving, she asked the nurse if she could speak to me. I came out of a patient room. I had 5 minutes, maybe less. Sigourney, she said. She was in a wheelchair. She looked smaller than she had on the stretcher. Yes, I said. You saved my life, she said, and I think that maybe. I held up a hand. I saved your life because you were a patient in my emergency department. That's my job, that's what doctors do. Whether they're related to the patient or not doesn't matter. But I want it to matter, she said. I want you to know that I know what you did, I said. I said this gently, but I said it clearly. I know you believed your daughter over me. I know you rejected my calls. I know you opened your hand and let me fall out of it. I know all of that. We were wrong, she whispered. Yes, I said, you were. I walked away before she could say anything else, before I could crack, before the professionalism gave way to the fact that 7 years of abandonment doesn't heal because someone finally admits they made a mistake. What happened after wasn't a reconciliation in the way I think the world uses that word. It wasn't roses and apologies and family dinner. It was something much slower and much more honest than that. My father started sending me professional articles, medical journals, research that was relevant to my field. No note, just the article in an email. The first one just said, "Thought you might find this interesting." I didn't respond. I read them anyway. My mother went to therapy, not for me, for herself. She was trying to understand why she had believed a lie so easily, why she had been willing to abandon her daughter. She told my father this in an email that he forwarded to me, and I think he forwarded it because he wanted me to know that she was trying. Carla sent me a letter from Boston. It was 4 pages long, and she wrote about her own therapy, about realizing that her need to be the golden child had been constructed by insecurity, by a family system that had rewarded performance and punished authenticity. She wrote about understanding, finally, that what she'd done to me was unforgivable, and that she wasn't asking for forgiveness. She was asking for the possibility of forgiveness someday. I didn't respond to the letter, but I kept it. A year passed, too. I became more senior in my residency. My parents started saying hello when they came to visit my mother for her follow-up appointments. My father asked me about my career. My mother came to one of my residency program celebrations and sat in the back, and I pretended not to see her, but I did see her, and she was crying. On the 4th anniversary of my mother's accident, which is also 7 years after Carla's lie, which means 10 years since I applied to Columbia, something shifted. I was at a conference. I was presenting research I'd been working on for 3 years about trauma-informed care in emergency medicine. It was good work. It mattered. During the Q&A, someone in the audience asked me about my personal connection to the topic. Yes, I said. I became interested in this because I treated a patient several years ago who had experienced significant trauma before arriving in the emergency department, and I realized that the way I approached her care changed when I understood her history, not in a clinical way, in a human way. I didn't say the patient was my mother. I didn't say that I was terrified I would lose her and that I was heartbroken that she didn't understand what I'd become. I said what was true without saying the whole truth. That's where we met, in partial honesty, because full honesty was still too raw. After the conference, my mother texted me, not called, texted, which was safer somehow. I heard about your presentation. I'm so proud of you. I stared at those 9 words for an entire hour. Then I texted back, thank you, can we have coffee? We had coffee in a neutral location, a Starbucks in Murray Hill. I arrived first. I ordered a black coffee and sat at a small table by the window. I watched her walk in, and I thought about how ordinary she looked, like any other 58-year-old woman, like someone who'd been hit by a car and survived because her estranged daughter happened to be an emergency medicine resident. Hi, she said. She asked before sitting down, which seemed important. Hi, I said. We sat in silence for a moment, and then, this is the part I still think about, she said something I wasn't expecting. I have been thinking about this for a long time, she said, and I realized something. I don't actually need you to forgive me, I need me to forgive me, but I also realized that we don't have to go back to being family right away. We can just try. We can try being people who know each other again, and maybe someday it becomes family, or maybe it doesn't, but we can try. I didn't cry, I was past crying, but I understood what she was offering, which was not absolution but presence, which was not forgetting but moving forward anyway. Okay, I said, we can try. We had coffee once a month for 6 months, and then every 2 weeks. My mother asked about my work and she actually listened to the answers. I asked about her physical therapy and she told me the truth, that it had been harder than expected, that she sometimes felt pain still, that she was grateful to be alive. Carla called me, not emailed, called. She was terrified. I could hear it in her voice. I wanted to hear your voice, she said. I wanted to know if you were still angry. Yes, I said, I'm still angry. I think I'll always be a little angry. But anger and love aren't mutually exclusive, and I'm starting to think maybe we can have both. It took another year of this slow, imperfect movement. But one day I was at my parents' house for my father's birthday. It was a small thing. My mother made lasagna and my father hated lasagna, but she made it anyway because it was my favorite. My father complimented my recent publication in a medical journal. Carla showed me pictures of her boyfriend and asked me for real advice about her anxiety, not the performed kind she used to ask for. We took a family photo, not a perfect one. My father's tie was slightly crooked. My mother's hair was still not the way she wanted it. I was exhausted from a 12-hour shift. Carla had a stain on her shirt she'd gotten while helping set the table, but we were all there, all four of us in the same frame. And it wasn't redemption. It wasn't the conclusion to our arc that ties everything up neatly. It was four people who had hurt each other, standing together in a room, accepting that some things can be changed and some things can't. My name is Sigourney Weaver, and I'm 27 years old. 7 years ago, my family chose to believe a lie instead of believing me. That was their choice, and I've spent these years understanding that their disbelief didn't make the truth less true. It just meant I had to become true in ways that didn't require their validation. Here's what I learned, and this is what I'm offering you if you need it. The truth doesn't expire. It doesn't matter if no one believes you for 5 days or 5 years. If you are right, you are right. The evidence of your life will eventually speak louder than any lie anyone can tell about you. You don't have to wait for anyone to see you. You can become so undeniably competent, so undeniably accomplished, so undeniably real that they have no choice but to finally see you. And the hardest part, the thing that actually took me longer than building my career, was accepting that even when they finally do see you, it won't erase the years they didn't. There will always be a scar. There will always be a part of me that remembers being 17 and being disbelieved by the people who are supposed to believe in you above all else. That memory doesn't go away. You just learn to carry it. But you can carry it alongside something new. You can build a life so remarkable that it becomes undeniable. You can become a doctor or a lawyer or an architect or whatever it is that calls to you, not for them but for yourself. And when they finally believe you, you'll realize you never needed them to. You'd already saved yourself. 4 plates on a table. It's not much, it's not perfect, but it's real, and after all those years of invisible, real feels like everything.